Hello, welcome to the project summary of the project Hack Your Coil. As a reminder from the pitch, in this project we aim to gather as much information as we can about these 32-channel Nova coils for 7 Tesla in order to understand why our fMRI protocols have higher noise amplification chief factors for the PTX coils for parallel transmit as opposed to the STX, the single transmit coils. Virtually all of the 100 7 Tesla scanners installed worldwide have those two coils, and those two coils have evolved from a prototype engineering challenge to an FDA approved medical standard product. The research community, however, knows very little about the details of these standards and how stable those coils are across the different models, or also which coil should I use for fMRI protocols that are less limited by inhomogeneity constraints and are more limited by sensitivity constraints. I was overwhelmed by the input of the last 2 days. I got input from 26 contributors looking at 30 independent RF coils across 4 continents and in 2 vendors. I know very little about coils and coil building in general, and so I thought for this project I'd just learn as much as I can. Little did I know that a lot of this knowledge about coils is proprietary information and not out there in the public domain of the academic literature. So as part of this hackathon, we got access to documentation of the coil utils, the standard QA metrics that are installed on most of the scanners out there, written by Jonathan Polimeni and ported by Thomas Banner. We validated the results of those to understand if they really give us what we think it does. They do. And we got access to ancient manuals about the coil location lineup, but also we got access to the reports that the vendors do about the QA, about the stability of those coils. Comparing the coil covers, it seems that there are at least 5 different geometrical models. Importantly, the STX coil transmit cannot be pushed down as much as the PTX coil transmit. There is this extra space over here that already tells us something about the coverage differences. A difference that is not there for the Philips versions of the Nova coils. The PTX coils seem to be more consistent across Siemens scanners, the Terras and the 70 Plus scanners, compared to the STX coil. So for cross-site studies, the PTX coil, even in CP mode, seems to be the better choice to use. The structural differences become even more obvious looking at those data over here. We are in a hospital, and hospitals have CT scanners, allowing us to look inside the coil without opening the coil that would compromise the warranty. And you can see here that the PTX coil is not only deeper, but it's also deeper in the cover. Additionally, also it's way shorter, so the upper end misses about 6 centimeters as opposed to the STX coil, which already tells us a lot. So if we want to, for example, look at the motor cortex, we would better use the STX coil. If we are more interested in the bottom of the temporal lobes, we would better use the PTX coil. To confirm these results, we also used Hogwarts lemon-scented premium floor wax to cover the inside and the outside of the transmitter. So the wax right next to the elements then is expected to give the strongest signals, allowing us to map out the size in MRI images and allowing us also to look at the brain and the elements in the same frame of reference, suggesting these differences over here. And this tells us that in our initial fMRI performance differences between PTX and STX that got us into this mess, they're not really just a matter of comparing the number of channels that you have, but it's rather a matter of comparing 2 different coil locations and sizes. So the famous problem of the inhomogeneities of 7 Tesla at the bottom of the temporal lobes that everybody knows who is working with 7 Tesla might have never been just a problem of 7 Tesla or just a problem of single transmits. It was maybe also just largely a problem of having coils that are kind of focusing on the motor cortex, where the bottom of the temporal lobes are just largely outside the coils already. Additionally, we found that there are small differences in the location of the head case and size with respect to the gradient isocenter. So the receive coil is not centered within the transmit coil, which is not centered within the gradient, differently across the different models, which can have an effect on SNR. Namely, the receiver sensitivity is usually not absolutely flat across frequencies. Off-resonance frequencies are often more sensitive within an allowed range. So we went to the scanner and just measured the SNR while pulling out the patient table more and more and more. And indeed, with the phantom in the identical position within the coil, just having different gradient offsets varies the peak SNR by as much as 40%, which can explain some of the differences that we have been seeing, depending on the redirection and bandwidth, of course. And the off-isocenter effect was also very consistent across sites, where the PTX coil is always deeper than the STX coil and the Terra is always deeper than the 70 Plus scanners. Next, let's look at the noise correlation across channels in all sites, which is an absolute mess of a result. I was expecting something like that the right columns are always a bit brighter than the left ones, but it's just a mess. I was tearing my hair out, and I had to stare at these matrices for quite a while until I recognized a pattern. And now I think that you can give me any two matrices from any scanner and I can pick out with good certainty which one is which I want to show you on the averages over here, where you can see that there is this kind of checkerboard pattern only visible for the PTX, and the STX is kind of smoother and has this elevated floor. And this weird checkerboard comes from elements that surprisingly are really referring to the bottom row of channels and pairs of those, including channels that are very, very far from each other, which means that they are probably coupling via the transmitter that covers all of them only for the PTX and not the STX coil. And those are the channels that are most significantly higher in all the PTX coils compared to all the STX coils. There are also other weird features, for example, that along the diagonal there are these groups of 4, which really nicely correspond to the different spokes of the star-shaped alignment of the different coils. And this is also consistent across STX and PTX. There are other things that are consistent across STX and PTX, namely that there's these weird checkerboards along the diagonal, which seem to be coming from this weird ordering that we have coils aligned as 1, 2, 4, 3, like that. On top of that, there are also elements that are higher correlated for the STX coil compared to the PTX coil, namely those turquoise ones. And those seems to be pairs and groups of coils that are the different spokes of the star-shaped patterns that are right next to each other, which kind of makes sense. We confirmed that the coupling is really originating from the coils themselves and not just the cables of the scanner, visible by the reduced coupling when you unplug the coil. We also tested multiple coils on the same scanner and the same coils across 3 scanners, confirming the same, that it's the coils that are responsible for the noise coupling and not the scanner cables. To conclude, we learned that there's no such thing as a PTX versus STX comparison. It doesn't really matter how many coils you have and which technology you're using. It seems to be much more relevant how big your transmit elements are and where they're located over the brain areas. Thank you for your attention.